And by that, let me introduce the wonderful speaker that we have tonight, Brigitte Gabriel. Although she needs no introduction, but you will allow me for a second. Okay. She's one of the leading terrorism experts in the world, providing information and analysis on the rise of global Islamic terrorism. She lectures everywhere in Europe, in Australia, and she is a regular commentator in CNN, in MSNBC, in Fox, and in other channels. She is the former news anchor for World News, the Arabic evening news broadcasts from the Middle East. And she is, not less important, she is the president and CEO of Act for America, the largest... They know. The largest grassroots citizen action network dedicated to preserving national security and combating Islamic supremacy. So, please welcome our guest.
Thank you. I am honored and delighted to be here tonight. Wow, we have a full house. This is wonderful. Okay, we adjust the microphone. See, I used to be 6 feet tall, but I shrunk after doing this for 8 years. But don't let my size fool you. I may be 5'2", but I've got a 7-foot voice. Thank you. I am honored to speak before you here about my love for Israel. As a Lebanese who considers herself a passionate Zionist, who believes in the state of Israel and the existence of the state of Israel as the Jewish state, I believe the Jewish people... I believe Israel and the Jewish people have a right to exist and have their own Jewish state. Israel is a beacon of democracy in the world and needs to be defended by all freedom-loving people. And I think it's about time people stand up proudly and say this publicly and defend her, because Israel is under attack. I am here... Thank you. I am here to speak about our national security, Israel's national security. I'm going to be talking about terrorism and the rise of global Islamic terrorism that threaten not only Israel, but threatens all of us at this point. And before I begin my lecture, I would like to make something very clear. I am here to talk about radical Islam. Not all Muslims are radical. There are 1.2 billion Muslims in the world today. The majority of them are peace-loving people like you and me, who wake up every morning to go to their work, to make money, to take care of their family, to raise their children, to put a roof over their head. They do not want to have anything to do with terrorism. It is a minority that is driving the agenda, and those are the radicals. However, out of the 1.2 billion Muslims, we believe that the radical minority are estimated to be between 15 to 25%. That translates to between 180 million to 300 million people who are willing to walk into this room right now screaming Allahu Akbar to blow us all up to smithereen. That still leaves 1 billion people who are peaceful of moderate. We are not talking about them. Do you understand that? And for those of you who understand, raise your hand. Okay, so we're clear. We're talking about the radical minority, and that minority is 300 million people that I'm talking about tonight. So, I'm very passionate about the issue of terrorism and why we need to be protecting our country. And the reason I am so passionate about this, people ask me all the time, why, Brigitte, you are so passionate? Why are you driven? Why aren't you afraid for your life? And I tell them, remember how Holocaust survivors walk around with tattoos on their arms? And they say, yes. I say, I walk around with scars. Scars seen and unseen. Scars that I have been looking at since I was 10 years old, when my home was bombed by radical Muslims, burying me under the rubble, destroying my home. I know what happens when people turn a blind eye to evil, thinking it's not going to happen to me. It's happening over there. It doesn't affect me. So here I am to talk to you about today, my experience with terrorism. You see, I come from Lebanon. Lebanon used to be the only majority Christian country in the Middle East. We were open-minded, we were fair, we were tolerant, we were multicultural. We prided ourselves on our multiculturalism. We had open border policy. We welcomed everyone into our country because we wanted to share with them the westernization which we had created in the heart of the Middle East. Arab sheikhs used to send their children to study in my country because we had built the best universities in the Middle East. They graduated and worked and stayed and worked in our economy because we had built the best economy in the heart of the Middle East, even though we did not have any oil. Beirut became Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. Unfortunately, all that began to change by the 60s and the 70s with the influx of the Palestinians into Lebanon out of Jordan. You see, King Hussein kicked out the Palestinians after Yasser Arafat tried to overthrow the king and establish a base from which to fight Israel, kill the Jews and throw them into the sea. He failed because of the dictatorship of the king. The Palestinians came to Lebanon. We accepted them because we had refugee camps already set up. Because we were the only country to accept the third wave of Palestinian refugees into Lebanon. They came to Lebanon. They put their heads together with the majority Muslims in Lebanon at that time. And they declared war on the Christians. Yasser Arafat wanted to create a base in Lebanon to fight Israel, kill the Jews, and throw them into the sea. And he was able to use our open-mindedness, our tolerance, our multiculturalism, our good-heartedness to topple our democracy, and this is how we lost our country. I remember by 1974, the Palestinians had been in Lebanon now for 4 years. We, the Christians in South Lebanon, and all of Lebanon, stopped traveling. We became prisoners to our home and our communities. And I would ask my parents, how come we're not going to Beirut this Christmas to spend Christmas with my family? Because the rest of the extended family lived in Beirut. And my father would tell me, well, we decided to stay home this Christmas because we just wanted to be together here. Well, you have to understand, that was not fun for me because I'm an only child to an elderly parent. But the reason later why I found out that we are not going to Beirut is because the Palestinians and the Muslims started setting up checkpoints, fly-by-night checkpoints, and started stopping cars, traveling. And they would stop people and get them out of their cars and look at their IDs. And in Lebanon, our religion is written on our national ID. You are either a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew. So when the Muslims would see that this is a Christian family traveling, they would get them out of the car and shoot them in cold blood. The word traveled fast. It became known as identity killing at the time. Thomas Friedman, in his book From Beirut to Jerusalem, writes about it. By 1975, the Muslims and the Palestinians formed their own army called Jaysh Lebanon al-Arabi, the Arabic Lebanese army, and started attacking different communities in Lebanon, especially Christian communities. They started killing the Christians, taking city after city, town after town, in order to establish their base. They would walk into a Christian city. They would find Christians hiding in a bomb shelter. They would find a mother and a father hiding with a little baby. They would take the baby, tie one leg of the baby to the mother and another leg to the father, and pull the parents apart, splitting the child in half. They would walk into our churches, urinate and defecate on the altar using the Bible as toilet paper, and then torch our churches. This is the reality that we lived under that no one wants to talk about. I believe the biggest disservice the American media did to the American public is not show the beheading of Daniel Pearl and Nick Berg. I believe Americans need to see the barbarism coming our way. We knew what our fate was going to be as the Palestinians advanced and they were taking over cities and towns. I lived in South Lebanon, in a little area called Marjayoun, the last Christian enclave left in South Lebanon. We were surrounded by the Palestinians to be slaughtered. We knew what our fate was going to be. They were bombing us. My 9/11 happened to me in 1975, when the Muslims blew up my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble wounded as they shouted, Allahu Akbar. My only crime was that I was a Christian living in a Christian town. I ended up wounded and in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I laid in a hospital bed as a little child, with IVs in both arms, with needles in both arms, going from one surgery to another, I would ask my parents, why did they do this to us? And my parents would tell me, because we are Christians, the Muslims consider us infidels and they want to kill us. So I learned since I was 10 years old that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith. See, when I talk like this at Christian churches in America, people don't understand it. But you as Jews understand. Because the majority of you who fled whatever country you were born in, because of persecution, because of your race, because the people that attacked you because you were Jewish. Whether you were an atheist or you practiced your religion, that was irrelevant. You were a Jew and you were identified as such. The Germans threw you in concentration camps. Arabic countries threw you out of your homes because you were Jews. We, the minorities in Lebanon, were under the same attack simply because we were Christians. I ended up leaving the hospital and coming back home. But my home was no longer the home. I left. My new home became a bomb shelter underground. An 8x10 bomb shelter, 6 feet underground, where my mother and my father and I lived, with no electricity, no water, and very little food. To get some food, we would crawl under the bombs, and we would dig out dandelions and different vegetation and different greenery, because it was the only greenery we had, and we would eat that. I learned to peel thorn in my tender young fingers at the age of 11 and 12 so I can eat the stalk that grew inside the thorn. We didn't have any water because the Palestinians and Muslims cut off all our water supplies and all our food supplies and the electricity. But thankfully, I lived in a town called Marjayoun, Valley of Springs. And we used to crawl under snipers' bullets to a nearby spring to get some water. And before we left our bomb shelter, we would hold each other's hands and say a prayer and say our last goodbyes, because we did not know if we're going to come back alive or dead just to get a drink of water. And what used to take a 5-minute walk would take us hours crawling in a ditch just to be able to go get water. And when we would get to the spring, my mother had to use her stocking on top of the gallon of water to catch all the worms and all the maggots and all the rocks and all the dirt so we can drink the water. And this became my existence. We lived in the mountains in Lebanon. In the winter, it was very cold. So we didn't have any heat. My father would walk out of our bomb shelter and break twigs from the trees around the shelter and bring them in. And he would pour kerosene or benzene or mazout on the twigs and light a fire. And we would huddle around the fire to warm up. And many nights we had an agreement. Whoever woke up first would drag the other two outside and slap them on their face to wake up. Because many nights we would pass out because of carbon monoxide poisoning. This became my existence. I went from being an only child to a wealthy Lebanese man who was living the Lebanese dream with a chauffeur to drive me to school and living servants at home, to living eating grass with a father who lost all his money in the bombing, living 6 feet underground, fighting to survive. And my life continued like this. We knew what our fate was going to be because we were surrounded by the combined forces of radical Muslims and Palestinians to slaughter us. But to our back was Israel. And we knew of the two enemies because at that time Israel was supposedly the enemy of Lebanon. We knew of the two enemies. If we go to the Jews and beg for help, the Jews are not going to slaughter us because we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims. And few people from my town went to Israel and begged for help. And they told the Israeli generals, unless you help us now, you're going to have the radical Muslims and Palestinians on your border within 48 hours. And Israel started coming in the middle of the night and started bringing ammunition for the military and started bringing food for the children and started bringing bomb shelters to those who did not have bomb shelters and blankets to those who did not have blankets. And we learned very quickly, Israel started taking the Christian men to Israel and trained them how to fight. Because we learned very quickly that you can have all the professional degrees behind you on the wall. Your law degree, your medical degree, your accounting degree, your whatever degree. None of that will do you any good when you are faced with an enemy bent on killing you in the name of Allah. And this became our existence. We went on living like this for 3 years, Israel coming in the middle of the night and helping the Christians. By 1978, I was 13 years old. A friend of ours stopped by one day and he said, Brigitte, I just want to let you know that we heard on the radios that we're going to be under a major attack by the Muslims and the Palestinians tonight. And I want you to know that if we die, if I don't see you tomorrow, I want to wish you a merciful death. And he left. And I remember, at the age of 13 years old, putting on my Sunday best, my Sunday dress, because I wanted to look pretty when I'm dead, knowing that when they come to slaughter me, there would be no one to bury me. And I remember my mother combing my long black hair down to my hips and tying a white ribbon in my hair that matched the white flowers in my blue dress. As I sobbed, crying, begging her, I don't want to die. I'm only 13 years old. I don't want to die. And there was nothing my mother could say to me. And I remember we had a 2-hour ceasefire sitting in the corner of our bomb shelter. And my parents opened up their Bibles and we started reading Psalm 91, and we held each other's hands. And my parents said to me, when they come to slaughter us tonight, we'll create a distraction. You just run towards Israel and you never look back. We lived a long life. You are young. You just run to Israel and you never look back. Thank God I did not have to make that difficult decision that night, because Israel came in physically into Lebanon and established a security zone and kicked out the Muslims and the Palestinians away from our area and set up major artillery points around our area to defend us and bomb the Palestinians and Muslims who tried to infiltrate our area. And this is how we continued living until 1982 when Israel invaded Lebanon, 5 years later. And the only reason Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 was because the Palestinians and the Muslims, including the Syrians, were shelling Israel at that time. All the northern towns in Israel calling it the Lebanese resistance. We, the true Lebanese, had nothing to do with it. Syria was shelling Israel, calling it the Lebanese resistance. Iran had gotten involved in the war. There were 11 Islamic terrorist organizations, including the PLO, operating out of Lebanon, all screaming jihad, jihad, jihad. We learned the hard way what that word means. Israel started working with the Christian Lebanese to help them take back their country. Israel and the Christians agreed to each other that if Israel comes in and kicks out the radical Islamists out of the country, including Yasser Arafat, that Israel and the Christians would work together so the Christians can have their democracy back and sign a peace treaty with Israel. In that war, as Israel came into Lebanon working with the Christians, my mother became wounded by a Muslim shell falling in front of our bomb shelter as the Muslims were retreating, as they were frantically retreating because of Israel's invasion. For my mother, we had to take her to Israel for treatment because in Lebanon, we had only a hospital bombed out. Israel had fixed up one room in that hospital, and Israel had put an Israeli soldier who was a doctor on duty and 2 Israeli nurses to give first aid to people who were wounded in the war, just like my mother. And we knew that we had to take my mother to Israel for treatment because it was our only lifeline. For my mother, it was a life-saving experience. For me, it was a life-changing experience. Before we left to the hospital, my father hands me $60, and he said, here's some money in case you need it, knowing we're going to take my mother to Israel. And I remember touching money for the first time in my life, because when you live in a bomb shelter, you don't go shopping. And I took the money, and we took my mother to the hospital. They gave her first aid, and they put her in an Israeli-donated ambulance to drive us to Israel so they can give my mother first aid. The driver of the ambulance was a Lebanese driver. He was a friend of the family. It was a 10-minute drive. We raced under the bombs until we got to the border. They took my mother out of that ambulance, put her inside another Israeli ambulance, to take her to the nearest hospital that can take care of her injury. It's Sfat Hospital in northern Israel, which is about an hour from the border. The Lebanese driver walked around the ambulance to me and asked me if I had any money because he needed the fee for the ambulance. And like an innocent 17-year-old, I take the money out of my pocket and I show it to him and I said, "How much do I owe you?" And he looked at my money and he said, "Give me 30, which was half the money I had. I thanked him very much for his service. They put my mother in the Israeli ambulance inside Israel. I sat next to her, and we drove to Isfat. This time, the ambulance driver was an Israeli soldier. He was Miloim. He was just called 12 hours prior because of the war. And this was the first time I am alone in Israel without anybody really with me, friends or relatives. I mean, we used to go to Israel for visits, but this is the first time I'm in Israel by myself with my mother, laying unconscious in the back seat and the stretcher in the ambulance. The Israeli driver was so nice, was so kind with me. He treated me like his own daughter. He would listen to the radio. He would tell me what they were saying on the radio about how far Israel was advancing into Lebanon. I couldn't believe what a gentle, nice man he was. We get to the hospital. They take my mother out of the Israeli ambulance into the emergency room. And I walked around the ambulance to the Israeli driver to pay him the fee for the ride, thinking to myself, my God, if the 10-minute drive cost me $30, how much is this going to cost me? It's an hour drive. I handed my money to the Israeli driver and I said, "How much do I owe you?" And he looked at my money and he said, "What is this for?" And I said, "This is the fee for the ambulance, for the drive." He says, "Oh, no, you don't owe me anything. This is a free service from us to you. You take good care of your mother, and I wish you well, and you take good care of yourself." And I thought to myself, what an honorable man. What an ethical man. This man could have taken my money and partied all night, and I would not have known the difference. Yet he didn't. And I became very angry because I realized the Lebanese driver basically robbed me. I didn't owe him for that ambulance. He basically stole my money. That was my first lesson in the difference between the Arabic culture and the Israeli culture. We got into the emergency room and there were hundreds of people wounded on the floor of the emergency room. Israeli soldiers brought in from Lebanon. Lebanese Muslims brought in from Lebanon. Christians brought in from Lebanon. Terrorist Palestinians brought in from Lebanon. I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought to myself, I can understand why the Israelis are treating me. I am their friend. I am their ally. But why on earth are they treating the Palestinians and the Muslims knowing that they would slit their throat in 30 seconds if they had a chance to? Little did I know about the values of the Israeli culture. The doctors treated everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They saw people in need and they helped. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her because her injury was more severe. I couldn't believe my eyes. We went into the 4th floor of the hospital where they put my mother in a room where they had previously that day brought 2 other Muslim ladies into the room. And they put my mother in. And within 5 minutes after we were in the room, I hear all this commotion outside our balcony. And nurses were running through our room out to the balcony to see what was happening. And I went out to see what was happening. And 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed coming from Lebanon, bringing in wounded Israeli soldiers. And they were taking them out on stretches, one after one, into the emergency room. And I stood at that balcony, looking down at that sight, feeling sick to my stomach, feeling embarrassed, feeling humiliated, feeling brokenhearted. After all, these people are wounded because of the war with my country. I was surrounded with people around me on the balcony. I didn't make eye contact with anyone because I did not know how they're going to feel about me. I was surrounded by mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers of Israeli soldiers wounded in the hospital. But I stayed looking down. And all of a sudden I felt this tapping on my shoulder. And I looked to my side. And an Israeli nurse was standing beside me. And she said, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, they just brought in my mother. She's in this room." And this lady puts her arm around me. And she says, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. If you need anything, just call my name. My name is Leah. We'll take good care of your mother. And I started crying. I started sobbing. Because for the first time in my life, I experienced civilization. I experienced a human quality that I knew for a fact did not exist in my culture. I saw the love and compassion of the Israelis in their most trying moments. I realized that all the lies and all the fabricated lies we were fed about Israel that were so far from reality. I knew for a fact if I was a Jew standing on the 4th floor of any Arabic hospital anywhere in the Middle East, I would be lynched and thrown down to my death as shouts of joy of Allahu Akbar would echo through the hospital and down the surrounding streets. I ended up spending 22 days in that hospital. Those days changed my life. Changed the way I believe information, changed the way I listen to the media, changed the way I watch television, because I realized Arabic children are fed a lie by their government about the Jewish people. That was so far from reality. As I stayed in the hospital and got to know the people of the mothers and the families of the Israeli wounded soldiers, my mother was always wounded going from one surgery to another. I became good friends with 2 Jewish mothers whose sons were wounded in the hospital. One of them was Rina Potashnik from Pardes Khana, Israel. Rina had her own son Amir wounded in the hospital. He was wounded with his eyes and he became blind. And I ended up spending a lot of time with Rina. And one day I was in Rina's room and the Israeli National Band came to play songs to lift the spirits of the Israeli soldiers. Songs like Yerushalayim Sel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold, and the Tikva. And I remember one day they came and I was standing there. And they started playing the songs and we started crying. And I felt so uncomfortable in the room. I did not want to make Rina uncomfortable. And I started walking backward. After all, her son is wounded because of the war with my country. And without skipping a beat, Rina holds me with my hand, pulls me back in. And she said, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And we both stood there holding each other's hands crying. What a difference between her, a Jewish mother, looking at her only son, deformed at the age of 19 years old, who is still able to love me, supposedly her enemy. What a difference between her and a Muslim mother willing to strap bombs on her son's body and send him out to blow himself up just to kill a few Christians and Jews. The difference, my friends, between the Arabic culture and the Israeli culture is a difference between barbarism and civilization. One of the ladies staying with my mother in the room, she had been there for 10 days, and after 10 days, the Israeli soldiers would come in their morning routine to change her bandages and take care of her wounds. And even after 10 days, they saved her life. And when they would leave the room, she would look at them and say, I hate you all, I wish you were all dead. And for the first time in my life, I saw evil. Because when you are unable to be grateful for those who saved your life, you have no soul. You have crossed a very fine line between humanity and something very ugly on the other side. I had to go back to Lebanon because I'm an only child. I had to take care of my parents. But I vowed that one day I will go back to Israel. That one day I want to come live amongst those people whose values I respected and admired. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to have what they had. Because I realized, even as a Christian, they had something even I did not have. They were able to love and forgive their enemy, the Palestinians, in a way I wasn't able to. And I was the Christian who was supposed to love like Jesus taught. I ended up moving back to Israel in 1984 and becoming a news anchor for World News in the Middle East, living in Jerusalem, reporting in Jerusalem, and covering world events where I was able to evaluate information that was not filtered through the Arabic propaganda filters that Arabs are oblivious to. And as I reported on terrorist activities happening around the world in the 80s, I worked between 1984 and 1989 as news anchor for World News. And as I reported every night about different terrorist activities happening around the world, I started connecting the dots. I started realizing there was a pattern developing. The name of the perpetrators were always Muslims. Ahmed, Muhammad, Hussein, Ali. The name of the victims were always Westerners, Christians and Jews. Terry Waite, Terry Anderson, Colonel Higgins, the Achille Lauro, the TWA, the Panam Flight. As a matter of fact, I can give you a list. I have a list in my book, Because They Hate. 3 pages long of all the terrorist attacks that were perpetrated. And I started realizing that what I used to think was a regional problem between a majority Muslim Middle East trying to kill or expel the minority Christians and Jews had become a worldwide problem. But the world was not paying attention. Because as long as Jewish blood was being shed on the streets of Tel Aviv and Christian blood was being shed on the streets of Beirut, nobody in the world gave a darn. It wasn't until September 11th, 2001 in the United States when the world finally woke up and realized, why do they hate us? We have a problem. All of a sudden today, America realized that we are fighting the exact same enemy Israel has been fighting for over 60 years. We are fighting the same enemy here in the United States. Our country here has been infiltrated on all levels with terrorist organizations setting up shop in America. And when I speak to different organizations and to different people, I say, you only worry about Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is not the only problem we have in the United States. As a matter of fact, of all the terrorist organizations that have set up shop on American soil, the top 3 are Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. And of all of them, Hamas has the largest infrastructure on American soil. Hamas has cells in over 40 states in the United States. Hamas has cells in the top 31 cities in the United States. And to give you an idea of Hamas's infrastructure in America, here are some of the cities where they have cells in. They have cells in Boston, Massachusetts, New York, Laurel, Maryland, Potomac, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Henderson, Virginia, Springfield, Virginia. Notice how they formed a ring around our capital. Raleigh, North Carolina, Boca Raton, Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, Orlando, Tampa, Detroit, Michigan, Houston, Texas, Columbia, Missouri, Plainfield, Illinois, Kansas City, Kansas, Chicago, Denver, Oklahoma, Arlington, Texas, Dallas, Texas, Tucson, Arizona, Seattle, Washington, San Francisco, Santa Clara, Los Angeles, San Diego. One of the most Hamas cells are in Anaheim, in Los Angeles, in Culver City, all the way around you. Right here, operating in your own communities. The infiltration is not only happening through our societies in here. By the way, the FBI do know this information. I'm not sharing anything with you that our government doesn't know about. We monitor them. We monitor their activities. We monitor their filter organizations that they have set up where they don't call it Hamas in the United States. It's called by other names. The infiltration is not only happening through the terrorist organizations setting up infrastructure in America. The terrorist infiltration is happening also through the border. What's happening in Arizona right now is a major issue, and this is why I want to bring in the issue of the border. Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and Hezbollah are working with the MS-13 gang, the notorious South American gang, in smuggling terrorists into the United States. Al-Qaeda is paying between $25,000 to $50,000 per terrorist to be smuggled into the United States. Hamas and Hezbollah are paying between $5,000 to $10,000. The drug cartels have figured out a much more profitable way to make money than smuggle poor little Mexicans who cannot pay much to come here and work in our landscaping. We found out that the Mexican embassy in Beirut, that Hezbollah, one of the employees at the Mexican embassy, is selling visas to Mexico for $3,000 a visa. Hezbollah members are buying those visas because they know once you get to Mexico, you can literally waltz your way into the United States. Our government calls them, when you talk about the border, they call them OTMs, other than Mexicans. Because we have become such a politically correct society, nobody wants to talk about reality. And I believe we need to throw political correctness in the garbage. The infiltration is happening through the mosques in our community. We know that the Saudis are funding 90% of the mosques in the United States. The radicals are being educated and recruited in the mosques in America. The Freedom House, the Center for Religious Freedom, did a study where they went undercover in some of the most prominent mosques and Islamic institutions in the United States and collected over 200 books and publications provided by the government of Saudi Arabia to Muslims living in the United States to teach them how to deal with infidels living in non-Muslim land. And here's what the Saudis are teaching. By the way, this is taken out of the King Fahd Mosque right here in Los Angeles. Quote, as you can tell, by the way, I'm going to quote you word for word. As you can see, I don't need papers to give a speech. But I will make sure I am going to quote you so I don't misuse a word, I don't take a word out of context, so you will know what is being taught in the mosques in your own community. In their relations with all non-Muslims, these Saudi books and publications repeatedly exhort Muslims to, quote, hate them for their religion, meaning us, Christians and Jews and Buddhists and atheists and Sikhs and lesbians and gays and everybody else, to hate for Allah's sake, always oppose them in every way, maintain a wall of resentment against them. They say that democracy is responsible for all the horrible wars of the 20th century, and that attractive names like democracy, justice, freedom, brotherhood, and equality cause all of the world's problems. They say that it is the religious duty of every Muslim to impose, and I continue quoting, functionally Islamic government on every country in the world. This religious duty is binding in principle, in law, in self-defense, in community, and as a sacred obligation of jihad. In order to fulfill the sacred obligation of jihad, they must, and I continue quoting, invade its western heartland and struggle to overcome it until all the world shouts by the name of the Prophet Muhammad and the teachings of Islam spread throughout the world. Only then will Muslims achieve their fundamental goal, all religion will be exclusively for Allah, end quote. We found out that this is being taught in 7 out of 10 mosques in the United States. 7 out of 10. Is it any wonder why in the last 12 months alone, we have arrested 54 homegrown terrorists, all Americans in the United States, all Muslims either born into the Islamic faith or have converted into the Islamic faith, more than any other militia or radical group anywhere in our country. Because this is where the indoctrination is taking place. The other problem where we are being infiltrated is our universities. I call our universities occupied territories. The Saudis, with their oil wealth, have been able to exploit a program basically to fund our universities. It's called the Title VI program. The Title VI program was instituted by our government after World War II to teach American students about foreign languages and foreign cultures so they may be an asset to our country when they get involved in the diplomatic field. But what's happening is Saudi Arabia, because of their oil wealth, are exploiting this program, giving millions of dollars to our universities, setting up Middle East study departments and political science departments, appointing Arab professors who are anti-Israel and anti-America to literally brainwash our students into believing Israel is evil, Israel is the problem, America is the problem. Here is the extent. Here is the extent of the Saudi peddling that has taken place in our universities. King Fahd of Saudi Arabia has donated $20 million to set up Middle East study at the University of Arkansas. $5 million donated to Berkeley's Middle East study from 2 Saudi sheikhs linked to Al-Qaeda. Harvard received $22.5 million. $28.1 million went to Georgetown. $11 million to Cornell. $5 million to MIT. $1.5 million to Texas A&M. $1 million to Princeton. Rutgers received $5 million share endowment, as did Columbia, which tried to lie to conceal the source of the funds. Other recipients of Saudi-tainted monies include UC Santa Barbara, Johns Hopkins University, Rice University, American University, University of Chicago, USC, UCLA, Duke University, Syracuse University, Howard University, University of Idaho, Washington State University, Ohio State University, Arizona State University. I can go on and on. You get the idea. From the Ivy League to the community colleges, from the East Coast to the West Coast and everything in between. We pump the gas, they pump poison into the hearts and minds of our future generation. What is the best way to destroy a society? Take the children and brainwash them. What did Hitler do? Hitler did the exact same thing. We are seeing the same type of supremacy and hate education being taught in our universities right now. People ask me, Brigitte, why is the media so biased? The media is so biased, it's unbelievable. I tell them, why are you surprised? For the last 16 years, those students who have been graduating out of our universities, being fed the steady diet of hate against Israel and against America, are now the news anchors, the opinion shapers, the news writers, the bureau chiefs, who are spouting these ideas that they have been taught. Unfortunately, we have become such a society who lost their tongue to political correctness, where people are afraid to stand up and call a spade a spade. If it is not I, then who? If it is not now, then when? If we don't stand up now and stop tolerating intolerance in the name of multiculturalism, we're going to lose our freedoms. Tolerating intolerance is a crime. We have so much to lose. We live in the greatest country in the world. We live in the best country in the world. I'm an immigrant to this great nation. I came here 20 years ago because I married an American. And I'm so proud to have him here with me today. Charles, please stand up. There's my husband right here. Right here. Charles, raise your hand. To the front. In the front. Stand up. I want people to see you. Stand up, raise your hand. Here he is. This is the man who is the reason why I'm standing here before you today. I rarely get the opportunity to travel with my husband. But I am honored tonight to be speaking not only to a general audience, but to be speaking to the love of my life, to be speaking to the man who is my honor and my glory, the tiara over my head, my sunshine. As far as I'm concerned, the sun rises and sets at your feet, my love. I am honored to be your wife, and I thank you for giving me the opportunity to come to America, to be here, to be able to do what I do, because I couldn't have done it without you, my love, and thank you for your support. Charles and I have been together for 25 years. We have 2 children. Yes, I'm a very happily married woman. I want to quote you something from Elie Wiesel, from his book, Night. Many of you have read Elie Wiesel. Many of you respect him. And here's what Elie Wiesel writes as a warning to people who do not listen. He writes, the fate of the Jews of the small town of Transylvania called Saige, their blindness as they confronted the destiny from which they would have still had time to flee, the inconceivable passivity with which they surrendered to it, deaf to the warnings and pleas of a witness who, having escaped the massacre, relates to them what he has seen with his own eyes, but they refuse to believe him, and they call him a madman. I am here as a reality check. What I talked about to you tonight is not a wonderful dream that we all dream we can have. We all want peace in the world. We all do not want war in the world. I am the first person to stand up against war. I walk around with shrapnels in my body. No one knows the price of war as much as I do. But I believe, unless the good people of the world right now stand up and be counted and speak up against radicalism, against evil done in the name of religion, any religion. If any evil is done in the name of my religion, Christianity, I would be the first person to march on the streets and condemn it. We need to see the same thing out of the Muslim community, boldly speaking. And I encourage all Muslims to stand up and speak. I encourage all Muslims to come together in a huge movement. Show us the million-man march in Washington, D.C., condemning radical organization like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like Al-Qaeda, by name. Call evil by its name. And I cannot end my speech without thanking each one of you sitting here in the audience today. Those of you who build businesses in this great nation, those of you who voted, those of you who worked and paid taxes, those of you who participated in building this great nation I call home. I am so thankful for you, for preparing a nation for me, where a humble immigrant like me can come, can prosper, can be free, can have the ability to stand up here and express my opinion freely. I thank you, because my freedom is built upon all the work and all the taxes and all the voting and all your political activism and your involvement in making America great. We are the best nation in the world, and what makes us great... Yes, we are. And what makes us great is our ability to come together, to discuss issues that are difficult to discuss, but at least we have the freedom to discuss them, to make sure that our children will inherit a country where they can live freely. And I believe we are fighting a war to survive. In the last 100 years, evil dwelled because so many people stood by and did nothing, allowing evil to prevail. As America stood up against and defeated communism and Nazism, this is the time we need to rise and defeat Islamofascism, the greatest threat to world peace, and Israel is on the front line of this war. Thank you, God bless you, and God bless our country.